The entire village gathered in the great square, their voices rising like a thunderstorm as they pointed at Amara and laughed. "Foolish girl," they shouted. "Your husband abandoned you 3 years ago. He is never coming back." The chief's son, Kofi, stood before her with expensive robes and gold chains around his neck, his hands stretched out in marriage. "Leave that ghost you call a husband," Kofi sneered, "and marry me instead. I will make you the richest woman in all of Zubri." But Amara stood firm, her head held high even as tears rolled down her cheeks. "I made a promise," she whispered. "And I will keep it." The crowd's laughter grew louder, and even her own mother turned away in shame. What they didn't know was that at that very moment, far across the mountains in the golden city of Ashanti, something miraculous was about to happen that would change everything. But let us go back to the beginning, to understand how Amara found herself in this terrible situation. Amara lived in the small village of Zubri, nestled between rolling hills and vast farmlands. She was known throughout the village for two things: her kind heart and her beautiful singing voice. Every morning, as the sun painted the sky orange and pink, Amara would sing while fetching water from the river. Her voice was so lovely that even the birds would stop their own songs to listen. When Amara was 18 years old, a young trader named Jabari came to Zubri. He was tall and strong, with a bright smile that made everyone trust him immediately. Jabari sold beautiful cloth and pottery from distant lands, and his stories of faraway places made all the children gather around him in wonder. From the moment Jabari heard Amara singing by the river, he knew she was special. Every day, he would find reasons to walk past her family's compound. He would buy vegetables from her mother's garden, even though he was staying at the village inn where food was provided. Amara noticed him too, and soon, they would talk for hours under the great baobab tree at the edge of the village. After 6 months, Jabari went to Amara's father, Tendoji, and asked for permission to marry her. "I am just a simple trader now," Jabari said honestly, "but I work hard, and I promise to take care of your daughter with all my heart." Tendoji looked into the young man's eyes and saw sincerity there. He agreed to the marriage. The wedding was a joyful celebration. The whole village came together, dancing and feasting under strings of colorful lanterns. Amara wore a dress of bright yellow and orange cloth that Jabari had chosen especially for her. As they danced together, Jabari whispered in her ear, "I promise I will always come back to you, no matter what happens." For 2 years, life was beautiful. Jabari would travel to nearby towns to trade, but he always returned to Amara within a few weeks. They built a small house together, and Amara planted a garden full of vegetables and flowers. Every evening, they would sit outside their home, and Amara would sing while Jabari played a small wooden flute. The neighbors would smile, hearing their music float through the air. But then, one day, Jabari came home with exciting news. "Amara," he said, his eyes shining, "I have heard of a great opportunity in the city of Ashanti. It is very far away, beyond the mountains and across the desert. A wealthy merchant there is looking for an assistant, someone to help him with his business. If I work for him for just 3 years, I could learn everything about trading in the big cities. We could build a better house, send our future children to school, and never worry about money again." Amara's heart grew heavy. 3 years is a very long time, Jabari. "I know," he said, holding her hands. "But I promise you, I will come back. I will write you letters every month. And when I return, we will have the life we have always dreamed of." Amara trusted her husband. She helped him pack his belongings, and on the day he left, the entire village came to see him off. Jabari kissed Amara's forehead and repeated his promise, "I will come back to you. Wait for me." For the first 6 months, letters came regularly. Jabari wrote about the amazing city of Ashanti, with its tall buildings and busy markets. He described the merchant he worked for, a man named Kwame, who was teaching him the secrets of successful trading. Amara would read these letters over and over, showing them to her parents and friends. But then, the letters stopped coming. Amara waited by the road every day, hoping to see the mail carrier bring news from Jabari. 1 month passed. Then 2 months. Then 6 months. Still, no word came from her husband. The villagers began to whisper. Perhaps he found a new wife in the city, some said. City women are more sophisticated than village girls, others added. Poor Amara, she has been abandoned. Amara refused to believe them. Every morning, she would wake up and tend to her garden, keeping their home exactly as Jabari had left it. She continued to sing, though her songs were now tinged with sadness. At night, she would look at the moon and pray that her husband was safe, wherever he was. Years passed. 1 year became 2, then 2 became 3. Still, no word from Jabari. The villagers' whispers grew louder and crueler. She is wasting her life, they said. She should move on and find a new husband. That was when Kofi, the chief's son, began to show interest in Amara. Kofi was rich and powerful, the most eligible bachelor in Zubri. He had his choice of any woman in the village, but he wanted Amara. Perhaps it was her beauty, or perhaps it was the challenge of winning over a woman who remained devoted to an absent husband. Kofi would visit Amara's home with expensive gifts, fine cloth, jewelry, baskets of fruit. Each time, Amara politely refused them. I am married, she would say simply. Your husband has been gone for 3 years. Kofi would argue. He is never coming back. Everyone knows this. Stop being foolish and marry me instead. I can give you everything. But Amara would shake her head. I made a promise, and I intend to keep it. This went on for months. Kofi grew more and more frustrated. He was not used to being rejected, especially by a woman married to a man who had clearly abandoned her. Finally, he decided to force the issue publicly. That was how Amara found herself standing in the village square on that terrible day, with the entire community gathered around. Kofi had called a special meeting and demanded that Amara make her choice in front of everyone. People of Zuburi, Kofi announced in a loud voice. We have all watched Amara waste away, waiting for a husband who abandoned her years ago. I, Kofi, son of our beloved chief, offer to marry her and restore her honor. She will want for nothing. Her family will be elevated in status. All she must do is accept reality and let go of a ghost. The crowd murmured in agreement. Even Amara's own mother stepped forward. My daughter, she said gently, perhaps it is time to accept the truth. Jabari is not coming back. Kofi is offering you a good life. Think about your future. But Amara stood firm, even as her heart broke at her mother's words. I made a vow before all of you on my wedding day, she said, her voice strong despite her tears. I promised to be faithful to Jabari for better or worse. That promise did not come with conditions. It did not say, unless he is gone for 3 years or unless someone richer comes along. I will not break my word. The laughter started then. It began with a few young men in the crowd, then spread like wildfire. Soon, the entire village was laughing at Amara, calling her foolish and naive. Children pointed and giggled. Women shook their heads in pity. Men called her stupid for rejecting Kofi's generous offer. Kofi's face turned red with embarrassment and anger. You choose disgrace over honor, he shouted. You choose poverty over wealth. Fine. When you are old and alone with nothing, remember this day and know that you brought it upon yourself. He stormed off, his servants following behind him. The crowd slowly dispersed, still laughing and gossiping about foolish Amara who was too stubborn to accept reality. Amara walked home alone, her head bowed but her resolve unshaken. She entered her small house and sat in the darkness, allowing herself to finally cry. Jabari, she whispered into the empty room, wherever you are, I hope you know I kept my promise. What Amara did not know was that at that exact moment, hundreds of miles away in the city of Ashanti, Jabari was standing in front of a massive warehouse filled with gold, spices, and precious stones. The merchant Kwame stood beside him, smiling proudly. "Jabari," Kwame said, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder, "in 3 years, you have proven yourself to be the most honest and hardworking assistant I have ever had. I have no children of my own, and I am growing old. I have decided to make you my business partner. Half of everything you see here is now yours." Jabari could barely breathe. The wealth before him was beyond anything he had ever imagined. He would return to Amara not as a simple trader, but as one of the richest men in the region. But then Kwame's expression grew serious. "However, there is something you must know. 2 years ago, I sent you many letters to give to your wife. Did you not receive them?" Jabari's face went pale. "What letters?" "I sent letters to Amara every month for the first 6 months, but then you told me the mail carrier had stopped coming to our village because of bandits on the road. You said it was too dangerous to send letters. I have been saving every coin to visit her, but you needed me here to complete the big trades." Kwame's eyes widened in horror. "Jabari, I never said such a thing. My nephew, Barisa, was supposed to be handling all the mail to and from your village. He assured me your letters were being sent and that you were receiving news from home." At that moment, Barisa walked into the warehouse. Seeing Kwame and Jabari's faces, he knew his deception had been discovered. The truth came spilling out. Barisa had been jealous of Jabari's success and had been intercepting all the letters in both directions for 2 years. He wanted Kwame to become frustrated with Jabari for apparently neglecting his wife, and he wanted Amara to believe Jabari had abandoned her, hoping she would remarry and Jabari would be heartbroken and leave. Kwame banished Barisa from the business immediately and turned to Jabari with tears in his eyes. "My boy, I am so sorry. Because of my nephew's wickedness, you and your wife have suffered terribly. We must go to Zubri immediately. We will leave tomorrow at dawn." Jabari spent that entire night organizing a caravan like nothing Zubri had ever seen. He loaded wagons with gold, fine cloth, pottery, and gifts for the entire village. He purchased the fastest horses and hired guards to protect the valuable cargo. Most importantly, he wrote a long letter to Amara, explaining everything that had happened. As the sun rose over Ashanti, Jabari's magnificent caravan began its journey toward Zubri. It would take 2 weeks to cross the desert and mountains, but Jabari didn't care. He was finally going home to the wife who held his heart. Back in Zubri, life had become very difficult for Amara. After her public rejection of coffee, the chief's son had used his influence to make her suffer. Traders refused to buy vegetables from her garden. Women excluded her from village gatherings. Children were forbidden from playing near her house, as if her foolishness might be contagious. Amara's parents visited her one evening, both looking tired and sad. "Daughter," her father Tendoji said, "the chief has made it clear that our family will continue to face difficulties as long as you refuse coffee. Your younger sister cannot find a husband because of the shame you have brought us. Please, reconsider." Amara felt as if her heart was being torn in two. She loved her family dearly and hated that they were suffering because of her. But she also knew, deep in her soul, that Jabari had not abandoned her. She could feel it. "Father, Mother, I am sorry for the pain this causes you. But I cannot break my vow. Something must have happened to prevent Jabari from writing to me. I know he would not leave me willingly." Her mother sighed deeply. "Amara, my dear girl, sometimes love means letting go. Even if something happened to Jabari, even if he is not able to come back, you must think of the living. Your sister, your family, they need you to be practical." After her parents left, Amara sat alone in her house once more. She looked at her wedding dress, carefully preserved in a wooden chest. She thought about her life and wondered if perhaps everyone else was right and she was wrong. Maybe holding on to hope was just another name for foolishness. That night, Amara made a decision. She would give Jabari until the end of the harvest season. If he had not returned or sent word by then, she would accept that he was truly gone and would release herself from her promise. It broke her heart to even think it, but she could not let her family continue to suffer. The next morning, Amara woke to strange sounds outside her house. She heard shouting, but not the usual cruel taunts. This sounded different. Excited. Amazed. She rushed to her window and saw people running toward the village entrance, their faces filled with wonder. Curious despite herself, Amara wrapped a cloth around her shoulders and walked toward the commotion. As she got closer, she saw the entire village gathered at the main road, staring at something in the distance. A massive dust cloud was approaching, and as it grew nearer, Amara could make out shapes, wagons, horses, and people. The crowd parted slightly, and Amara pushed her way to the front. Her breath caught in her throat. Leading the caravan on a magnificent black horse was a man dressed in fine robes. Even from a distance, even though he looked more prosperous and confident than she remembered, Amara knew that face. She knew that smile. "Jabari," she whispered. At the sound of her voice, even though it was barely audible over the crowd's noise, Jabari's head turned. His eyes found hers, and his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen. He jumped off his horse and began running toward her. The crowd gasped collectively. This was not the simple trader who had left 3 years ago. This was a man of obvious wealth and importance. The rumors had been wrong. Completely and utterly wrong. Jabari reached Amara and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet as she burst into tears. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry. I wrote to you every month, but the letters never reached you. I would never abandon you. Never." Behind him, Kwame dismounted and approached the village chief, who had come forward with coffee beside him. "Greetings," Kwame said formally. "I am Kwame, Merchant Prince of Ashanti. This young man, Jabari, is my business partner and one of the wealthiest traders in the region. He has spoken often of his beloved wife, Amara. I understand there has been some confusion about his absence, but I am here to tell you that Jabari's loyalty to his wife never wavered, just as I hear her loyalty to him never wavered." The crowd stood in stunned silence. Kofi's face had gone white, then red, then purple. He opened his mouth to speak but found no words would come. Jabari turned to address the village, his arm still around Amara's waist. "I have brought gifts for everyone in Zubri, to celebrate my return and to thank you for being Amara's community. However, I must say I am disappointed to hear how my wife was treated in my absence." Before anyone could respond, a young boy suddenly cried out and pointed at the horizon. "Look! More riders are coming. And they are carrying weapons." Everyone turned to see another dust cloud approaching fast. This group was smaller but moving with purpose and speed. As they got closer, Amara's blood ran cold. She recognized the leader. It was a notorious bandit named Zubri, the same man the village had been named after generations ago, before he had left to pursue a life of crime in the desert. Zubri the bandit pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the village, his gang of 20 armed men behind him. His eyes gleamed with greed as he surveyed Jabari's caravan loaded with wealth. Well, he said, his voice like gravel. "What a perfect homecoming gift. I think I'll be taking all of this." Jabari stepped forward, positioning himself between the bandits and Amara. His hand moved to his side, but he carried no weapon. The entire village held its breath as Zubri the bandit dismounted slowly, a cruel smile spreading across his scarred face. Behind him, his 20 men gripped their spears and machetes, their eyes fixed on the wagons full of treasure. Kwame moved to stand beside Jabari, and though he was an old man, his voice was steady. "We have guards protecting this caravan. You would be wise to live peacefully." Zubri laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "I see only 10 guards. We are 20. And we know these lands better than anyone. This village is far from any help. By the time soldiers arrive, we will be ghosts in the desert. His eyes swept over the crowd and landed on Amara. Besides, I hear there is a woman here who knows something about loyalty. Perhaps we should test just how far that loyalty extends. The threat in his words was clear. Amara felt her blood turn to ice, but she refused to show fear. She squeezed Jabari's hand, and he squeezed back. The village chief stepped forward, his old legs trembling slightly. Zubri, your great-grandfather founded this village with honor. Would you truly bring shame to your family name by robbing innocent people? My great-grandfather died poor and forgotten, Zubri spat. Honor does not fill an empty stomach. Now, everyone move aside. We are taking the wagons. Just as the bandits began to advance, a strange sound echoed across the hills. It was a horn, deep and resonant, unlike anything the villagers had heard before. Everyone froze, even the bandits. The sound came again, closer this time, and then a third group appeared on the road. But these were not more bandits. These were royal soldiers, 50 of them, wearing the colors of the king of Ashanti. At their head rode a woman in magnificent armor, her presence commanding respect. She pulled her horse to a stop and surveyed the scene with sharp, intelligent eyes. I am General Nia of the King's Guard, she announced. We have been tracking this band of thieves for 3 months. Zubri, you are under arrest for raiding villages and caravans across 5 regions. She turned to Jabari. Merchant Jabari, we received word of your caravan's route and decided to follow at a distance. It seems we arrived at the perfect time. Zubri's face twisted with rage. He knew he was outnumbered now, but he was not the type of man to surrender easily. You may have more soldiers, he snarled, but we can still do damage before you take us down. And we will start with this village. For a tense moment, nobody moved. The bandits' hands tightened on their weapons. The soldiers prepared to charge. The villagers began to panic, mothers grabbing their children and running for their homes. Then Amara did something that shocked everyone. She started to sing. Her voice rose clear and pure into the air, the same beautiful voice that had made even birds pause their songs. She sang an ancient peace song, one that her grandmother had taught her, about the futility of violence and the strength found in mercy. The melody was haunting and lovely, and despite the tension of the moment, people found themselves stopping to listen. Even Zubri seemed affected. His hand, which had been reaching for his weapon, slowly lowered. There was something in Amara's voice that reached past his anger and greed, touching a part of him that remembered being a child in this village, before bitterness had hardened his heart. General Nia recognized the opportunity. She spoke quietly but firmly. Zubri, you have a choice. Surrender now, and you will face justice but live. Resist, and my soldiers will show no mercy. The song this woman sings is offering you peace. I suggest you take it. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Then, slowly, Zubri dropped his weapon to the ground. One by one, his men did the same. They knew when they were beaten. As the soldiers moved forward to bind the bandits, General Nia rode over to Amara. That was remarkably brave, she said with respect. You may have prevented much bloodshed today. The king will hear of this. Amara simply nodded, still holding tight to Jabari's hand. Her whole body was shaking now that the danger had passed, but she refused to let go of her husband. With the bandits secured and being led away, the village slowly came back to life. People emerged from their homes, talking excitedly about everything that had happened. Within an hour, the entire atmosphere had changed. What had begun as a day of mockery for Amara had transformed into something none of them could have imagined. Jabari began distributing gifts from his caravan. There were beautiful clothes for every woman, tools for every man, and toys for every child. For Amara's parents, he brought special gifts, a fine walking stick carved from ebony for her father, and a collection of rare spices for her mother. For the family who raised the most faithful woman I have ever known, he said. Amara's mother wept with joy and shame. I doubted you, daughter, she said, embracing Amara. I am so sorry. You were right to keep your faith. The village chief approached Jabari with humility. I must apologize for how your wife was treated in your absence. We should have supported her, not ridiculed her. Jabari's expression was gracious but firm. What matters is how you treat her from this day forward. Amara showed all of you what true loyalty looks like. I hope you will remember this lesson. Kofi had disappeared into his father's compound, too embarrassed to show his face. His public humiliation was complete. The woman he had mocked and tried to force into marriage was now revealed to be married to a man far wealthier and more respected than he could ever hope to be. As evening fell, Kwame arranged for a great feast. Jabari's servants prepared food for the entire village, and lanterns were strung up around the square, just like on Jabari and Amara's wedding day 3 years before. Musicians played, children danced, and for the first time in years, Amara felt truly happy. But as Jabari and Amara sat together, finally able to talk properly, Jabari noticed something in his wife's eyes. Despite her smile, there was a sadness there. What is wrong, my love? He asked gently. Amara looked down at her hands. I am ashamed to admit this, but I almost gave up. Last night, I decided that if you did not return by the end of harvest season, I would accept that you were truly gone. I came so close to breaking my promise. Jabari lifted her chin so their eyes met. But you did not break it. That is what matters. You held on when everyone told you to let go. You trusted in our love even when you had every reason to doubt. That makes you the strongest person I know. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching their village celebrate. Then Amara asked the question that had been burning in her heart. Tell me everything. Tell me about Ashanti, about why the letter stopped, about these 3 years we lost. So Jabari told her everything. He spoke of the magnificent city of Ashanti with its towering buildings and markets that stretched for miles. He described Kwame's kindness and how the old merchant had taught him not just about trading, but about honor and integrity. He explained how Kwame's nephew Barisa had intercepted their letters, driven by jealousy and spite. I should have tried harder to reach you, Jabari said, his voice heavy with regret. I should have left the business and come home when the letter stopped, but Kwame convinced me that the roads were too dangerous, that bandits were attacking travelers. I did not know he was being deceived by his own nephew. Barisa has been dealt with, Kwame added, joining their conversation. He has been banished from Ashanti and will never work in trading again. His name will be known only as a cautionary tale. As the night grew deeper, General Nia approached their table. Merchant Jabari, Lady Amara, the king of Ashanti has been seeking people of exceptional character to serve in various positions throughout the kingdom. Your story of mutual loyalty despite 3 years of separation and deliberate interference is exactly the kind of integrity he values. He has authorized me to offer you both a position at the royal court. Jabari and Amara looked at each other in surprise. What kind of position? Jabari asked carefully. Jabari, you would serve as the royal trade administrator, overseeing fair commerce throughout the kingdom. Amara, your gift for peacemaking today showed remarkable wisdom. The king seeks a council of advisors who can resolve conflicts without violence. You would be trained in mediation and diplomacy. It was an incredible opportunity, but Amara felt torn. This is my home, she said quietly. These people, despite how they treated me, are still my community. My family is here. General Nia smiled. The position would not require you to abandon Zubri. You would spend half the year in Ashanti and half here. Additionally, the king would fund improvements to this village, a proper school, a medical clinic, and better roads. Your family would be provided for, and your younger sister would have opportunities she could never have otherwise. Jabari took Amara's hand. This is your decision as much as mine. What do you want? Amara thought carefully. She remembered the years of loneliness, the mockery, the doubt that had crept into her heart during the darkest moments. But she also remembered why she had held on, because some promises are worth keeping, even when they cost you everything. This opportunity was not just for her and Jabari, but for her entire village. It was a chance to transform suffering into something meaningful. Yes, she said finally. We will accept. The celebration continued late into the night. Old grudges were forgotten, and the village came together in a way it had not in years. Children listened wide-eyed as Jabari told stories of his adventures in Ashanti. Young couples looked at Amara and Jabari with new understanding of what marriage truly meant. But not everyone was celebrating. In his compound, Kofi sat alone, consumed by bitterness. He had been humiliated in front of the entire village. The woman he had wanted had never wavered in her loyalty to another man, and now that man had returned as someone far above Kofi's own station. The chief's son paced his room, anger burning in his chest. As the night grew late, a figure slipped into Kofi's compound. It was Barisa, the nephew who had been banished from Ashanti. His clothes were dusty from travel, and his face was twisted with hatred. I hear there was quite a celebration today, he said bitterly. Kofi looked up in surprise. Who are you? I am the man who tried to destroy Jabari's happiness and failed. I am the man whose jealousy cost him everything. Barisa sat down uninvited. I heard what happened here today. It seems we both have reason to hate the same people. What do you want? Kofi asked suspiciously. Revenge, Barisa said simply. But I cannot do it alone. However, if we work together. He let the suggestion hang in the air. Kofi should have sent him away. He should have learned from the day's events that fighting against true loyalty and love was futile. But his pride was wounded, and wounded pride makes people do foolish things. What did you have in mind? Kofi asked. Meanwhile, back at the celebration, Amara excused herself to visit their old house one last time before the night ended. Jabari walked with her, his arm around her shoulders. Their small home looked exactly as he had left it 3 years ago. Amara had kept everything perfectly maintained, never giving up hope. You really kept it all this time, Jabari said, his voice filled with emotion as he saw his old sandals by the door, his tool still hanging on the wall, his favorite cup waiting on the shelf. I knew you would come back, Amara said simply. They sat outside under the stars, in the same spot where they used to make music together. Jabari pulled out his wooden flute, the one he had carried with him all the way to Ashanti and back. Will you sing for me? He asked. So Amara sang, and Jabari played, and their music floated through the night air just as it had in the old days. But now their song carried new meaning. It spoke of trials overcome, of faith rewarded, of love that endured despite time and distance and the cruelty of others. As they made music together, neither of them noticed the two figures watching from the shadows near the chief's compound. Barisa and Kofi stood side by side, their faces dark with malice. They were planning something that would test Jabari and Amara's happiness in ways they could not yet imagine. The next morning, Amara woke to find Jabari already up, speaking with Kwame about the logistics of their move to Ashanti. We should leave within the week, Kwame was saying. The king expects us for the autumn council. But before they could continue their discussion, a messenger arrived on an exhausted horse. He wore the colors of a village called Makena, 3 days' journey from Zubri. I seek Jabari, the merchant, he gasped, clearly having ridden hard. I am Jabari. What is wrong? The messenger handed him a sealed letter. Your brother, Django, has fallen gravely ill. The healers say he may not survive the week. He is calling for you. Jabari's face went pale. He had not mentioned his brother to Amara because they had been estranged for many years, but despite their differences, Django was still his only sibling. I must go to him, he said immediately. I will come with you, Amara said without hesitation. But Kwame shook his head. The journey to Makena passes through dangerous territory. If you go, you must take guards. However, most of our guards are scheduled to escort another caravan to Ashanti tomorrow. It is carrying very valuable cargo that cannot be delayed. General Nia, who was preparing to leave with her prisoners, overheard the conversation. I can spare 5 soldiers to escort you to Makena. It is not much, but with your own guards, it should be enough to ensure safe passage. They made hasty preparations. Jabari selected 3 of his fastest wagons and loaded them with gifts for his brother and supplies for the journey. Amara packed quickly, including herbs and medicine that might help with Django's illness. What none of them knew was that the messenger was not truly from Makena. He was a man hired by Barisa and Kofi. There was no sick brother. It was a trap designed to lure Jabari and Amara away from the safety of both Zubri and General Nia's full regiment of soldiers. As Jabari's small caravan left Zubri, Amara looked back at her village. Something felt wrong, though she could not name what it was. A chill ran down her spine despite the warm morning sun. Is everything alright? Jabari asked, noticing her expression. I do not know, Amara admitted. I just have a strange feeling. We will be fine, Jabari assured her. We have guards, and we will move quickly. If all goes well, we will reach Makena in 3 days, check on Django, and be back within a week. They traveled steadily throughout the day, making good time. The road to Makena was well traveled during the day, but as evening approached, they entered a stretch of wilderness known as the Barrens. It was a rocky, desolate area with few travelers and fewer settlements. As the sun began to set, one of the guards suggested they make camp. We should not travel through the Barrens at night, he said. The path is treacherous, and there are wild animals. They set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by large rocks. Fires were lit, and Amara prepared a simple meal. The soldiers took turns keeping watch while others rested. Everything seemed peaceful. But in the darkness beyond the firelight, figures moved silently into position. Barisa and Kofi had hired a group of desperate men, criminals who had been freed when Zubri's band was captured. There were 15 of them, more than enough to overwhelm Jabari's small group. Barisa smiled cruelly as he watched the camp from his hiding spot. By tomorrow, Jabari will have nothing, he whispered to Kofi. And that loyal wife of his will learn what happens when you choose the wrong man. As midnight approached, Amara suddenly woke from her sleep. She had heard something, a sound that did not belong in the natural night noises. She sat up carefully, not wanting to alarm anyone if she was just being paranoid. Then she saw it, a shadow moving between the rocks, too deliberate to be an animal. Her heart began to pound. She reached over and gently shook Jabari awake. Someone is out there, she whispered urgently. Jabari instantly became alert. He quietly woke the nearest guard, who began to rouse the others. But it was too late. With a sudden war cry, the attackers charged into the camp from all sides. Chaos erupted in the camp as 15 armed men rushed from the darkness, their weapons glinting in the firelight. Jabari's guards jumped to their feet, drawing their swords, but they were outnumbered 3-1. Steel clashed against steel as the battle began, the sound echoing off the rocks around them. Jabari pushed Amara behind one of the wagons, trying to shield her from the violence. Stay down, he shouted over the noise. He grabbed a walking stick, the only weapon within reach, and stood ready to defend his wife. One of the attackers broke through the guard's defense and charged toward them. Jabari swung the stick hard, connecting with the man's shoulder and knocking him sideways. But 2 more took his place. Amara looked around desperately for anything that could help. Her eyes fell on a pot of hot stew still sitting by the fire. Without thinking, she grabbed it and threw the scalding liquid at the nearest attacker, who screamed and fell back. But they were losing. Jabari's guards were skilled, but they were simply too few. One by one, they were being overwhelmed. Then Jabari saw him, Barisa, standing at the edge of the camp with Kofi beside him, both watching with satisfaction as their hired criminals did their dirty work. Barisa! Jabari shouted in fury. I should have known you were behind this. Barisa smiled coldly. You took everything from me, Jabari. My uncle chose you over his own blood. Now I will take everything from you. And when I am done, your precious loyal wife will learn what it means to choose poorly. Rage filled Jabari, giving him strength he did not know he had. He fought with desperate ferocity, protecting Amara with every ounce of his being. But an attacker came from his blind side, striking him hard across the head with the flat of a blade. Jabari crumpled to the ground, blood trickling down his face. Jabari! Amara screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. He was breathing but unconscious. She looked up at the attackers closing in around them, tears streaming down her face. After everything they had been through, after 3 years of waiting and hoping, was this how their story would end? One of the criminals reached for her, but suddenly a horn sounded in the distance. Everyone froze. The sound came again, closer now, and then horses appeared between the rocks. It was General Nia with 20 of her soldiers, riding hard toward the camp. It is a trap. Retreat! Barisa shouted to his hired men. The criminals, seeing the royal soldiers approaching, scattered into the darkness like shadows. Barisa and Kofi tried to run as well, but they were not fast enough. 2 soldiers rode them down and dragged them back to the camp. General Nia dismounted quickly, taking in the scene. 3 of Jabari's guards were wounded, and Jabari himself lay unconscious with Amara cradling his head. Get the healer, Nia commanded. One of her soldiers rushed forward with medical supplies. How did you know to come? Amara asked through her tears as the healer began tending to Jabari's wound. I did not trust the messenger, Nia explained. Something about him seemed false. So I sent scouts to follow your caravan at a distance. When they saw armed men gathering in the barrens, they rode back to alert me. We came as fast as we could. The healer cleaned Jabari's wound and wrapped it with clean cloth. The blow was hard, but he will recover. He is strong and young. He needs rest and care, but he will live. Amara sobbed with relief, holding Jabari's hand tightly. Slowly, his eyes began to flutter open. Amara, he whispered groggily. Are you hurt? No, my love. I am fine. We are both fine now. General Nia stood over Barisa and Kofi, who had been bound with ropes. Her face was like stone. This is beyond simple banditry. This was attempted murder and conspiracy. You will both face the king's justice, and I assure you, it will not be merciful. Kofi began to weep. I am the chief's son. You cannot do this to me. Your father's title means nothing when you break the king's law, Nia said coldly. You should have learned from what happened in Zubri. True loyalty and love cannot be destroyed by jealousy and spite. Instead, you let your wounded pride turn you into a criminal. Barisa said nothing, his face dark with hatred even in defeat. Some people, Amara realized, would never learn. The journey back to Zubri took 2 full days because they traveled slowly to allow Jabari and the wounded guards to recover. When they finally arrived at the village, news of the attack had already spread. Amara's parents rushed to embrace their daughter, weeping with relief that she was safe. The chief himself came to meet them, his face aged with shame and sorrow. I have failed as a leader, he said, his voice breaking. My own son plotted murder. There is no excuse. I am stepping down from my position. But Jabari, still weak but standing with Amara's support, shook his head. Your son's choices are not yours, Chief. Every person must answer for their own actions. However, Zubri needs strong leadership now more than ever. Do not abandon your people when they need guidance to ensure nothing like this happens again. The old chief looked at Jabari with gratitude and respect. You are generous, more generous than I deserve. Very well. I will remain chief, but I will establish a council of elders to help guide our decisions. Never again will one person hold so much unchecked power in this village, not even me. Kofi was taken away by General Nia's soldiers to face trial in Ashanti. The village watched in silence as the young man who had been their prince was led away in chains. It was a lesson no one in Zubiri would ever forget. Over the next few days, as Jabari recovered from his injury, preparations were made for their move to Ashanti. Kwame had returned with the news that the king was eager to meet the couple whose story of loyalty had reached his ears. But there were still matters to settle in Zubiri first. Amara's younger sister, Zawadi, approached her one afternoon while she was packing. "Sister," Zawadi said shyly, "I need to apologize. I was angry with you for refusing Kofi because I believed it was hurting our family's reputation. I see now that you were right to stand by your principles. You showed all of us what real integrity looks like." Amara embraced her sister warmly. "You were not wrong to worry about our family, Zawadi. I am just grateful that everything worked out in the end. And now, thanks to our new position, you will have opportunities one never dreamed of. The king has agreed to sponsor your education in Ashanti. You will study with the finest teachers in the kingdom." Zawadi's eyes filled with tears of joy. She had always loved learning but had resigned herself to a simple village life. Now, a whole new world was opening before her. On the day before they were to leave for Ashanti, the entire village gathered for a ceremony. The chief stood before everyone and made a formal proclamation. "Let it be known throughout the land that Amara, daughter of Tendoji, showed unwavering loyalty when tested by time and circumstance. Let her story be told to our children and our children's children, so they may learn what it means to keep a promise, even when the world tells you to break it." He then presented Amara with a beautiful necklace made of carved wood and precious stones. "This will be passed down through generations in our village as a symbol of faithfulness and honor. You have brought pride to Zubiri, and we will never forget it." Amara accepted the gift with humility. She looked out at the faces of her people, some of whom had mocked her just weeks before. But she held no bitterness in her heart. "I did not remain loyal to prove anything to anyone," she said. "I did it because I loved my husband and I believed in the promise we made to each other. If my story helps even one person hold on to hope during difficult times, then all the suffering was worth it." The crowd broke into applause, and many wiped tears from their eyes. Even those who had laughed at her most cruelly now understood the lesson she had taught them. That evening, Jabari and Amara walked through the village one last time, visiting places that held special memories. They stopped by the river where they had first met, by the great baobab tree where they had talked for hours during their courtship, and finally at their small house where they had built their life together. "Are you sad to leave?" Jabari asked as they stood in the doorway. Amara thought carefully before answering. "This place holds my past, but Ashanti holds our future. I am not sad because I know we are moving forward together. That is all I ever really wanted." They locked the door to their little house, but they did not give away the key. "We will return," Jabari promised. "This will always be our home, no matter how grand our house in Ashanti becomes." The next morning, their caravan departed for Ashanti. This time it was even larger than before, as Amara's parents and sister were traveling with them, along with several young people from Zubiri who had been offered apprenticeships in the royal city. General Nia herself led the escort, having grown fond of the couple whose story had touched even her warrior's heart. The journey to Ashanti took 3 weeks, as they traveled safely and slowly, stopping in various villages along the way. Word of their story had spread, and in each place, people came out to see the loyal wife and the husband who had returned. Amara found herself telling their tale over and over, and each time she did, she saw how it affected people. Young couples would hold hands a little tighter. Families would embrace a little longer. Her story was becoming legend. When they finally crested the last hill and saw Ashanti spread out before them, Amara gasped. Jabari had described the city, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality. Buildings of stone and wood rose 3 and 4 stories high. The market stretched as far as she could see, filled with goods from every corner of the known world. The palace itself sat on a hill in the center of the city, its walls gleaming white in the afternoon sun. "Welcome to your new home," Jabari said, squeezing her hand. They were taken directly to the palace, where servants led them to a suite of rooms more luxurious than anything Amara had ever imagined. There were soft beds, beautiful tapestries on the walls, and a balcony that overlooked the entire city. But Amara barely had time to absorb it all before a royal messenger arrived. "The king requests your presence in 1 hour," the messenger announced with a bow. "He wishes to meet you formally and discuss your new positions." Amara felt a flutter of nervousness. She had never met royalty before. What if she said something wrong? What if she embarrassed herself and Jabari? But Jabari seemed to sense her worry. "Just be yourself," he said gently. "That is all anyone can ask. Your natural wisdom and kindness are why the king wants you here." They dressed in fine clothes that had been provided for them and made their way to the throne room. The palace was even more magnificent inside than out. Gold decorations adorned the walls, and everywhere Amara looked, she saw beauty and craftsmanship beyond anything she had known existed. When they entered the throne room, they found it filled with nobles and advisors. At the far end, seated on a throne of carved ebony, was King Ose. He was younger than Amara had expected, perhaps 40 years old, with intelligent eyes and a strong presence that commanded respect without being intimidating. Jabari and Amara bowed deeply as they approached. "Rise," the king said, his voice warm. "You are Jabari and Amara, whose story has reached even my ears. Come closer. I would speak with you." They approached the throne, and King Ose studied them both carefully. "I have heard many versions of your tale," he said. "But I would like to hear it from you directly. Amara, tell me, what gave you the strength to remain loyal when everyone around you said you were foolish?" Amara took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "Your Majesty, I believe that promises matter. When I married Jabari, I made a vow before my community and before the spirits of my ancestors. That vow did not have conditions. It did not say I would be faithful only if things were easy, or only if I never faced mockery. I gave my word, and I am my word. If I broke my promise the moment it became difficult, what would that say about who I am?" The king nodded thoughtfully. "And you, Jabari? You worked for 3 years, building wealth and success, while believing your wife was receiving your letters and knowing you would return. Then you discovered she had been suffering in your absence, thinking you had abandoned her. How did that make you feel?" "Heartbroken, Your Majesty," Jabari answered honestly. "And furious at the man who had intercepted our letters. But mostly, I felt unworthy. Amara remained faithful with no proof I would return. I, at least, knew I was coming back. Her faith was far stronger than mine." King Ose smiled. "That is the mark of true character, recognizing the strength in others rather than claiming it for yourself. I believe you will both serve this kingdom well." He stood from his throne and walked down to stand before them. "However, before I officially appoint you to your positions, I have a test for you." Amara's heart began to pound. "What kind of test?" The king gestured to one of his advisors, who brought forward a wooden box. "In this box is a problem that has plagued my kingdom for months. 2 villages, Akili and Faoha, have been fighting over water rights to a river that runs between them. Each village claims the other is taking more than their fair share. Crops are dying, tempers are flaring, and I fear violence will break out if the situation is not resolved soon. Multiple advisors have tried to solve this problem, but neither village will accept any proposed solution. They say every solution favors one side over the other." He handed the box to Amara. Inside were documents describing the conflict in detail, maps of the villages and the river, and letters from both village chiefs explaining their grievances. You have 3 days to study this problem and present me with a solution. If you can solve what my most experienced advisors could not, then I will know you truly have the wisdom I seek. Amara took the box with trembling hands. This was an enormous responsibility. If she failed, would they lose this opportunity? Would they have to return to Jabari in shame? That night, in their palace chambers, Amara spread out all the documents and studied them carefully. Jabari helped her, and together they read late into the night. The problem seemed impossible. Both villages had legitimate claims. Both needed water for their crops. The river had always had enough water for both, but a drought 2 years ago had reduced its flow, and neither village had adjusted their usage. For 2 days, Amara wrestled with the problem. She considered various solutions, dividing the river's flow by a precise schedule, building a reservoir to store water, bringing water from another source. But each solution had problems. Schedules would require constant monitoring and would breed distrust. A reservoir would be expensive and would take years to build. Bringing water from elsewhere was not feasible given the terrain. On the 3rd day, feeling desperate, Amara decided to take a walk through the palace gardens to clear her mind. As she walked, she came upon a group of children playing. They had a small garden where they were growing vegetables, and they had devised a clever irrigation system using bamboo tubes and small clay pots to distribute water evenly to each plant. Watching them, an idea suddenly formed in Amara's mind. She rushed back to her chambers and looked at the maps again with fresh eyes. What if the solution was not about dividing the water, but about using it more efficiently? When she and Jabari presented their solution to the king the next day, the throne room was filled with nobles and advisors, all curious to see if the newcomers could solve the unsolvable problem. Amara spoke clearly and confidently. Your Majesty, the problem is not that there is not enough water. The problem is that both villages are using water inefficiently, wasting much of it through poor irrigation methods. I propose that the kingdom fund the construction of a proper irrigation system for both villages, using bamboo channels and distribution points that ensure every farm receives exactly the water it needs with minimal waste. Additionally, both villages should be taught better farming techniques that require less water. The river has enough water for both if they use it wisely. One of the king's advisors objected immediately. That would be very expensive. Why should the kingdom pay for their inefficiency? But Amara was ready for this. Because, Your Majesty, the cost of building the irrigation system is far less than the cost of the violence that will erupt if this conflict continues. Moreover, once these villages learn efficient water use, they can teach other villages. The entire kingdom will benefit. The investment will pay for itself many times over. Another advisor spoke up. But which village gets the system first? Whoever goes first will have an advantage. Neither goes first, Amara replied. The system is built simultaneously in both villages, using separate work crews. Everything is done equally and together. In fact, I suggest that farmers from each village be required to work on the other village's irrigation system. This way, each village has a stake in the other's success. They will see each other not as enemies fighting over water, but as partners working toward prosperity. The throne room fell silent. King Osei leaned forward on his throne, his expression thoughtful. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. Brilliant, he said. This solution does not just fix the problem. It transforms the entire relationship between the villages. It turns conflict into cooperation. He stood and addressed his court. This is exactly the kind of wisdom I was seeking. Amara saw what my advisors could not because she did not approach it as a political problem to be negotiated. She approached it as a community problem to be solved together. He turned to Jabari and Amara. You have passed my test far beyond my expectations. I hereby officially appoint you both to your positions. Jabari, you will be my royal trade administrator. Amara, You will be my advisor for community peace. Your first assignment, Amara, will be to oversee the implementation of your solution in Akili and for her. The court broke into applause. Amara felt tears of joy streaming down her face. They had done it. All the suffering, all the waiting, all the trials had led to this moment. In the months that followed, Amara's solution was implemented exactly as she had proposed. The irrigation systems were built, farmers from both villages worked side by side, and slowly, the hostility between Akili and Farha transformed into friendship. When the system was complete and water flowed efficiently to every farm, both villages held a joint celebration. They invited Amara and Jabari as guests of honor. Standing before the two communities, seeing former enemies now sharing food and music together, Amara felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was why she had endured 3 years of loneliness and mockery. This was why keeping promises mattered. Because integrity in small things led to opportunities for great things. Word of Amara's success spread throughout the kingdom. Other villages with conflicts began requesting her help. She traveled extensively, always with Jabari by her side when his trading duties allowed, solving disputes and bringing peace to troubled communities. Her reputation grew until people throughout the land spoke of the loyal wife whose wisdom was as great as her faithfulness. But Amara never forgot her roots. True to their promise, she and Jabari returned to Zubri twice a year. Each time they returned, they brought gifts and innovations they had learned in Ashanti. They funded the building of a school, just as General Nia had promised. They established a medical clinic staffed by healers trained in the royal city. They helped improve farming techniques and connected Zubri's craftspeople with markets in Ashanti. Zubri transformed from a small, isolated village into a thriving community known throughout the region. And every child in Zubri grew up hearing the story of Amara and Jabari, learning the lesson that loyalty, even when tested by time and hardship and the mockery of others, was a virtue worth maintaining. Years passed. Jabari became one of the king's most trusted advisors, helping to establish fair trade practices throughout the kingdom. Amara's reputation as a peacemaker grew until even neighboring kingdoms requested her assistance. They had 3 children, all of whom grew up understanding the value of keeping promises and treating others with integrity. On their 10th wedding anniversary, the king threw a grand celebration in their honor. The palace was filled with guests from every corner of the kingdom and beyond. During the feast, King Ose stood and raised his cup in a toast. 10 years ago, he began, a young woman in a small village named Zubri was faced with a choice. The easy path was before her, wealth, status, and the approval of her community. All she had to do was break a promise she had made 3 years earlier. But Amara chose the harder path. She chose loyalty over comfort, integrity over convenience. And because of that choice, because of her unwavering faith, she and her husband Jabari have brought more good to this kingdom than they could have ever imagined. Let their story remind us all that the choices we make in our darkest moments define who we truly are. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Amara and Jabari stood together, their children beside them, their families nearby, surrounded by friends and colleagues who respected them deeply. Looking around the room, seeing all the lives they had touched, all the communities they had helped, Amara thought back to that day in Zubri Square when everyone had laughed at her. She had stayed loyal when they called her foolish. She had kept her promise when they told her to let go. And then everything had changed, not just for her, but for so many others. As the celebration continued late into the night, Amara and Jabari slipped away to a quiet balcony overlooking the city. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the lights of Ashanti twinkle in the darkness. "Do you ever regret it?" Jabari asked softly. "Those 3 years you suffered because of me." Amara took his hand and smiled. "Every storm passes, my love. Every dark night ends in dawn. What matters is not the suffering we endured, but what we built from it. We turned pain into purpose, loneliness into legacy. Would I choose those 3 years if I could go back? No. But would I change the choice I made to wait for you? Never. They stood together, two people who had proven that loyalty was not just a word but a way of life, that promises kept could change not just individual lives but entire communities, and that sometimes the foolish choice is actually the wisest one of all. Far below them, the city of Ashanti hummed with life and possibility. And somewhere in that vast kingdom, in a small village called Jabari, children gathered around the fire as their grandmother told them once again the story of Amara, the loyal wife who stood firm when the world laughed, and how everything changed because she refused to break her promise.